Hello, welcome to the TriggerMesh webinar, How to Use Knative to Build Event-Driven Application Flows. My name is Mark Hinkel, and we will get started with Sebastien in just a minute or two. We're just waiting for everyone to log in. All right, welcome to our webinar. We'll get started in a few minutes. Welcome to the TriggerMesh webinar. We're still seeing a few people log in. We'll give you a couple minutes and then we'll get started. All right. I guess we'll get started. Hello, my name is Mark Hinkel, and I am the CEO of TriggerMesh, and today's webinar is entitled How to Use Knative to Build Event-Driven Application Flows, and our presenter will be Sebastien Goasguen, our Chief Product Officer. So, thank you for joining today. All right. For those of you that don't know Sebastien, he was the creator of Kubeless, one of the first serverless frameworks. He's been a VP of Apache Cloud Stack at the Apache Software Foundation, and he has been the one who has led the development of TriggerMesh's serverless products, which are built on Knative. My name is Mark Hinkel. I'll be facilitating today's webinar and giving you a little background before we go to Sebastien. So for those of you that are joined today, Greg's going to push out a poll of what your serverless usage looks like so we can sort of gauge the content today, whether you're a user today, you're looking to be a user, or if you're in the planning stages. So if you can answer that poll, that would be helpful for us. So we at TriggerMesh build our products on top of Kubernetes and Knative, and we believe that the future of application development is going to be a mesh of cloud-native functions and services that are consumed from multiple cloud providers and on-premises. And we believe that we're the catalyst for making those digital experiences easy to develop. Just a little background on us and our open source contributions. We are one of the top contributors to Knative, along with Google, Red Hat, VMware, and IBM. We also have a number of open source projects. One of them is a Knative Lambda runtime, which allows you to move your functions directly from Lambda into Knative without a rewrite. We also take advantage of the Knative eventing to trigger Knative functions using TriggerMesh solves. And it can be used on other clouds. And then Action, which actually uses Tecton for continuous deployment in the Kubernetes Knative ecosystem. So what we do at TriggerMesh is we help you integrate all these services. We are not going to do a product pitch today. We're going to talk about how those services interact, and Sebastien is going to take it from there. So Sebastien, I'm going to stop sharing and let you start your part.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you fine.
All right. Actually, let me share my entire desktop. It's going to be easier. And please, Mark, just tell me if what you see on my screen doesn't reflect what I'm talking. Welcome everybody to this webinar. Pleasure to have you. Pleasure to see you join. This first webinar. We hope to do more and more as we keep developing TriggerMesh. We keep developing all our products, open source and some not open source. But we are very excited to share our knowledge about building new type of cloud native applications on top of Kubernetes, thanks to Knative. And we're very excited because, as Mark said, we think that the future of application architecture is event-driven. And we really need to help you go into that direction, thinking about those loosely coupled components that interact with each other. So I'm going to use probably the next 25 minutes to give you a tour of what we've built and give you a taste of what's to come, right? So let's get started. Hopefully you're awake even on the West Coast, and let's get this party started. I'm going to share quite a few windows. So first thing I want to show you, actually, I'm going to take a risk. I always like to take risk. And I'm going to log in on TriggerMesh on our staging environment, right? Nobody should do this. You should always go to production. I'm going to go to staging because I'm excited about this new dashboard that we're building, and show you what TriggerMesh looks like right now, right? So you have a set of functionality to manage events because we're building event-driven applications. You have a set of functionality on the right under functions. Services repositories, because we need functions to process the events and transform them and link different sources together. So we have quite a lot of things going on in this dashboard, and things are fast evolving. I'm now going to jump onto our production environment, try to take less risk, but I wanted to give you a snapshot view on the of the staging. So here we are in production, and now we want to build those an event-driven application, and underneath we have Knative, right? So what does Knative provides? Knative provides two things. One is the ability to run services with a better abstraction than what Kubernetes provides. That's called a Knative service. So that's why we actually surface services in TriggerMesh. We're going to see that, and then Knative has eventing. So that's what you see in our section called events, right? I'm going to to be able to give you a taste for things and to give you a taste to why Knative is very important. I'm going to go to the Google Cloud Console, and I'm using their Cloud Run service, right? And those of you who don't know Cloud Run from Google, this is actually a service that runs on top of Knative, or at least exposes the Knative API. So here I'm going to create a service on the Cloud Run system, and you see that the unit of deployment is actually a container. So here I specify a container, GCR Cloud Run LO, right? That's the container that packages my function. I launch it, it's been created. Underneath, Google is doing its thing. If you were to use this in a Kubernetes cluster, you would actually have Knative, installed in that setup. And now Google gives me a URL. I'm going to click on that URL, and boom, I get to my app, right? So what happened there? Google saw the container, it created a service, deployed it. There was a little bit of a latency to see the app, and now it's running. That latency is the cold start that we often hear when we talk about AWS Lambda. All right. I want to here go to this YAML page, and definitely this is technical, right? So what I want to do is actually copy the YAML. Right. Let me. Why can I? Okay, I want to copy all that YAML. So I'm going to copy that YAML, and now go back to TriggerMesh. Boom. So now we're back on TriggerMesh, and we want to create a service. And because we're based on Knative, we can actually paste that same YAML from the Google Cloud, right? I'm just going to clean it a little bit, remove some of the metadata, remove the annotation, right? So I'm just cleaning a little bit. Okay. So the copy didn't work perfectly. So metadata, okay. The pasting didn't work. Space. So I'm pasting the same YAML manifest. I'm cleaning it a little bit because we actually don't need everything. And I'm going to show you what it looks like in the end, right? So I'm removing some okay, now I'm seeing everything. So actually everything was there, right? So I took the manifest from Google Cloud Run, and now I'm pasting it here inside my UI in TriggerMesh, and I'm going to create that service. Okay, what did I do? Must have prefix tm demo. Okay, tm demo foo. Okay. All right. So now I'm creating that, that manifest. We refresh a little bit. We have the cold start that's inherent to, Knative. Now I click on my URL, and bang, I have the same app. All right. So here you have the big benefit of Knative. It's an API that allows you to create services, gives you auto scaling and scale to zero. And if you use that API, you actually have workload portability, right? So maybe you were thinking like, why is he talking about Google Cloud Run when he's running TriggerMesh? Well, because I can take a service from Google and I can stick it in TriggerMesh and it runs, right? Just out of the box, right? Great. So clearly we don't want to do all this YAML thing all the time. We don't want to expose this potentially to all the the developers. So of course we have nice little UI. We say demo TriggerMesh, and now what we can say, hey, my function is actually here it's GCR Google Cloud Run hello, right? And if we want, we can specify environmental variable and so on, and labels. And people who see this will see that actually what we have here is the spec of a pod, right? Because underneath we have all the power of Kubernetes. Exciting. So I created this one, and this is almost the same as what I did, by pasting the YAML from Cloud Run, but I actually have, I have this this service in my directly in the UI. So I'm not sure I can get rid of it, right? So this is just the function bit. If we go through the wizard, notice that we also have an image catalog, right? So in that image catalog, we have a few functions like ASCII Cow. That's like the little bit of the joke to kind of keep things light, keep things fresh in this. We see the cold start here. It's orange and now it's green, right? So oof, that's a big cow, right? Let's refresh. There you go. That's better, right? So things are tough right now with COVID and everything in the US. Let's try to keep things lighthearted, right? So with a little bit of a crazy cow. So, here you go. We got a new one. So bottom line here, that's the basic service part of things, right? So container, better abstraction, you get auto scaling, you're great. How does that relate to building an event-driven application, right? It's going to be one component of an event-driven application. You need an ability to do functions that are going to scale, including scale all the way down to 0. Those functions, they can provide, processing of an event. They can be a target for your event flow. You name it. You need that type of compute capability to process the data, right? So that's great. We need this. Hopefully you're finding this interesting. The challenge with all those webinars and remote things is that we don't have any real-time feedback from the audience. So now we need to actually do something with the events, right? So how do we deal with events? Well, we say, hey, where are my events coming from? I need an event source, right? So here I have one running, and if I click on that event source, I see a manifest for that event source. I see API version, right? Knative v1 alpha 1. I see a kind GitHub source. So again, just like the service had a manifest, here we have an event source that's actually represented, as an API object, and there is a spec for that API object, so we can actually declare, what our event source looks like, right? So you could paste your YAML. If you wanted, you can kube control your YAML if you have your manifest. But of course, at TriggerMesh, we try to make things a little bit easier through our console. So let's say we want to do a cron job. We can go here. And because we are emitting events, we need a broker to handle those events. So when we define a source, we say, hey, send all those events to that broker. And here, it's a cron job, so we give it a cron schedule, and then we have to put a little bit of mark, right? Foo mark. So that's going to be our little cron event. And definitely, it's a little bit of a toy, but actually, that can be quite handy if you want to trigger an AWS Lambda on a schedule. If you want to trigger a service on a schedule, how do you do this? Well, you actually create, an event source. So here I've created my cron job. Every 1 minute, it's going to send foo mark to my broker. Notice that I have brokers here, including a default broker. If I click on it, I see that it's also an API object from Knative. So Knative gives me some of this. We're a little bit cutting edge here with the multi-tenant, channel broker for those that are, following Knative. And then once you have that source, sending an event to a broker, what you need to do, you need to say, hey, what do we do with those events in the broker? Where do we send them? How do we map them to a service? Well, that's where you come and you define a trigger. So you say, okay, TM demo, take, all the events in the broker and send them to what? Event display is not super, great. So let me create another service that's a little bit more visual. I'm going to take an image from a catalog, which is sockeye, right? From Scott. So this has a nice little, little UI. So I'm running my sockeye. And
Sebastien?
Yep.
While Andreas had a question, the services that you're showing you're not showing authentication, but he wanted to know how you'd manage the TLS certifications for these services if you needed to.
Right. So right now they're they're exposed. Most of them are exposed to the public internet. So let me create the trigger, and I'll get back to the question. So now I'm doing the trigger, and I'm send the event to sockeye. All right. So we refresh. The trigger is green, and again the trigger is also a Knative object. Right. So now we've done it the hard way. That's event flow the hard way. A source, a broker, a trigger. And if I go back to my services and I open my UI for sockeye, we refresh, and in the 1 minute we're going to see the event, from the cron job. While we wait to get that cron job event. Oops, how do we get it? Did I get it? There you go. So you see that some of those routes, I mean, all those routes are HTTP, but they can also be HTTPS, and that's where we have let's encrypt certificates, so we can get we can generate them on the fly. So there's cert manager that's running that can request a certificate for them. So that's all a configuration of Knative. So that gives you TLS. It doesn't give you authentication out of the box. All right. But when you launch a service, if I do, for example, here, you see there is a little toggle visibility. So if you toggle this, right now it's public, so you'll expose your service publicly. If you toggle to private, it's only reachable within the cluster, and there is no potential ingress from the public internet. Currently, there is no authentication built in with Knative. Okay, so with TriggerMesh, we have a way to do the authentication using the Kong API gateway, so we can actually front the services with, basic auth or token-based auth, for example. But out of the box in Knative, you don't get it. All right. So let's see. I was a little bit worried that I didn't see the event. Here you go. So and now we see our full mark events. They're showing up to Sockeye, which is just a little debugging application. All right. I hope that makes sense, right? We talked about services because our future applications, they need some type of compute, right, to do some processing. And now we're starting to build an event flow the hard way with a source, a broker, and a target. But what we decided to do at TriggerMesh is that we said, you know what, this is way too hard, right? So we need to actually make this easier for people. So we came up with this concept of a bridge, right? So what is a bridge? A bridge is what links a source to a target. So in our UI, you can create a bridge, right? And under the hood, those of you, will know what we did. We actually created a new API. So it's a custom resource definition in Kubernetes. We extended the Kubernetes API with an object that's a bridge, right? And then we wrote a controller to actually manage all the different components that make up the bridge. So here, if I want to do a bridge, I go in source, I add a source, right? So I could say, hey, let's add a GitHub source. So, foo, we're going to send it to the default broker, and we can say, Seb Goa, transform. That's one of my repos. I'm listening to push events. To be able to register the webhook with GitHub, I need a GitHub secret. So under the hood, we use Kubernetes secrets. So here I'm configuring a GitHub source, right, called foo. And then where do I want to send those events? I want to send those events to a service. And I could either create a new service through our UI or say, hey, you know what? Actually send them to Sockeye, which is already running, right? And I could save this. So now you see that I've created a bridge, right? I've created this event flow. Under the hood, Knative objects, but we have this overall wrapper that is the core of every bridge. And now I submit this, right? So we refresh, the controller needs to take over, right? Needs to see, hey, there's this object, and that object. And then suddenly your bridge is green. All the objects have been created. If I go to source, I see my foo source that has been created by my controller. It's all ready, right? So I have my, oops, I don't know why this keeps showing up. So I have my Sockeye that keeps on receiving my data from my cron. But if I go to my, if I go to my repo, and I get excited by this. So, this demo may get a little bit long on the tooth, but hopefully you're finding it interesting. So this is my repo, right? Transform. I'm listening to events in that repo. And I say, Mark is, super dope, right? So I edit my README and I make a commit, right? My source is detecting these events. How am I detecting events there? Because, automatically I had actually a webhook that was registered. So if I check, you see here, there's a no, actually it's this one. There's a webhook that's been added on the fly. And now if I go to Sockeye, oops, there you go. It's at the end. So if I go to sockeye, I just received an event because I made the commit. All right. So you see the GitHub event that was sent as soon as I did the commit. It's pretty big. And I was running it before, so I'm seeing a couple more events. All right. So that's the bridge, right? That's the core of every bridge. I do want to show you a little bit a sneak peek of the UI that we have here on staging, because it's getting pretty exciting. We have additional things, whether to show the status of your bridge. We have better UX for objects. Sources like this. We're going to add search capability and put the full list of sources. We have targets, right? So what you saw me do was a pretty simple target with the sockeye service, right? But we have exciting targets from third-party SaaS like Twilio, right? So if you want to send an event to Twilio and then receive an SMS, right, text message, you can just configure your Twilio target, right? We have event bridge here, potentially it's getting there in staging, right? So there lots of things happening. Validation is showing up. So there are lots of things coming up in the staging that I'm pretty excited about. Couple of things to wrap this up, and then hopefully take a few questions. I'm hearing pop-ups. Bridges. Even though our bridge controller is still closed source, but the sample bridges, they are open source. You can go to TriggerMesh bridges, and you're going to see a lot of examples. So what do we have that's possible? Lots of things where cron job is the source, injecting things into a Kafka cluster in Confluent Cloud, Elastic cluster, a cron job that triggers a Tecton pipeline. GitHub, of course, GitHub to Twilio. You want to get a text when you cut a GitHub release. You have a bridge for this. GitLab to an AWS Lambda, right? You name it. Kinesis to Confluent. Slack, we have a Slack source to Elastic, right? So, the sky is the limit here. And those bridges are actually fairly simple. They are source target, but then you can start doing very exciting things with transformation in the middle, functions, multiple brokers, right? The patterns that are emerging in those bridges is quite exciting. Couple of things here. Yesterday we actually open sourced this repo Knative sources, just to show you what we're doing and how we're doing things. So all our AWS sources are open source. It's TriggerMesh AWS event sources. You can go to this repo and you'll see that it's it's a Kubernetes controller with some CRDs and so on. But the non-AWS sources, we just open source this repo Knative sources, and you'll find our Slack source. All right. Slack event source is pretty exciting. I'm showing it to you, telling you it's open source, because the last thing I'm going to show you is that in staging, I have a bridge running, which is Slack to Slack. All right, it's a bit of a fun, bit of a joke I was having with Pablo in the team here. But I built this bridge, Slack to Slack. It listens in a Slack channel, and it sends an event in another Slack channel. All right, so this bridge is running in our staging. It does different things, and you see that we have two brokers, including a broker that does transformation, and we have well, actually, so it doesn't show here. We need to improve the UI still. We have an additional service. Oh, okay, no, I know why. You see, I'm even learning something here, and I wrote it right. We have a Google Translate service. So events are coming from Slack, and we subscribe to the broker that receives them. We translate the conversation and then send it to another Slack channel, right? So it's real-time translation of a Slack channel. Pretty exciting. I think it is, right? So I'm just going to show you our internal Slack. Yeah, I'm back staging, folks. You ready? Because you're live on the webinar. Okay. And we say, we can say, hello, how are you? Right? Hello, how are you? And what happens is that our bridge is listening to what we're saying in our general channel, and it gets that event, translates it, and sticks everything in the TM Spanish channel. So now what do we see? Here you go. We say, hi, webinar. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Quiero more. All right. So this is, the last bit of this webinar. Each, little bit of humor here, but extremely powerful technology underneath. Event-driven application that listens to events in Slack, does a real-time transformation using Google Translate, and then sticks the transformation back into Slack. Hopefully, that gives you some ideas about what you can build with every bridge. And yes, it's all based on Knative and uses all the powerful API of that project.
Right. Well, thanks, Sebastien. We have quite a few questions that came in. And the first one I wanted to get to is, could you talk about what parts are freely available and open source and what requires a commercial license?
Right, so the AWS event sources are all free. The Slack source, free and open source, because those are different. So AWS event sources, the Slack source, we have an IBM MQ source that's also open source. What else? We have a Knative client, TM, that's open source. So we have a lot of open source stack. If you just go to our GitHub, github.com/TriggerMesh, you'll see everything that's open. The sample bridges, they are open source, right? TriggerMesh bridges. What is not open source yet is the main every bridge controller. You can use it through our SaaS, cloud.triggermesh.io, but right now it's not open source. We would love to get any feedback from you folks. We would love to see what you would be interested to build with every bridge, and work with you on what are the key sources that you need, the key targets, right? And yeah, we would love to start building solutions with you.
And just to be clear, cloud.triggermesh.io is free to use for right now, and probably will be for quite some time. So if you want to duplicate what Sebastien was doing today, go to cloud.triggermesh.io and you can do exactly what he was doing. Another question we had was, does TriggerMesh integrate with Amazon EventBridge?
Yeah, right. So that's a very good. It's a very good question. So yes, we integrate with EventBridge. It's a little bit of a spoiler, but it turns out that I did show it quickly without paying attention. If you go in staging, in our staging environment, so you won't have access to the staging environment. But if you see that, one of the targets that we have is actually EventBridge, and we believe that it's super exciting because you can think that you can set up event sources from on-prem application like your Oracle database, your ERP system, your point of sale, whatever on-prem application you have, you can start defining an event source and use TriggerMesh to funnel all those events to AWS EventBridge, and then you start building applications in EventBridge. So it's going to open the door to lots of scenarios, and we already have quite a bit of feedback on this. So yes, we are integrating with EventBridge, and this should be available within a month.
Okay. The next question we have was, can Knative run on AWS?
Yeah, Knative runs on any Kubernetes cluster. So Knative runs on GKE, runs on EKS, EKS on AWS. it runs on your own Kubernetes cluster, under your desk. So yes, Knative runs on AWS.
Does TriggerMesh come with additional support for schema management like the Confluent schema registry?
So not right now. So that's a very good question. Right now the bridges that we have, I would say, are very point to point, right? Source to target, and we are starting to do a lot of custom transformation. But to do those transformation, you're correct that we need to know the schema of the incoming event, the schema of the outgoing event, and for this, definitely, still under the hood, we have event registry with schema registry, and I would say dynamic transformation. So that's in the roadmap, but it's not available in the SaaS right now.
Okay. And you showed a couple spoilers for the TriggerMesh 1.0. When do you think that will be available?
Yeah, so 1.0 or GA for us is going to be late October, early November. So another, what is that? What is it? 5 months, 4-5 months. So 4-5 months we'll go GA. But some of the things that you saw, like the new dashboard, for example, this is going to be released next week. Actually, you'll see that next week. But GA for us is November 1st.
So your options to deploy TriggerMesh are the cloud SaaS offering. What are the other options to deploy TriggerMesh?
So the SaaS cloud.triggermesh.io, this one. Then we have a certified OpenShift operator. So if you're on OpenShift 4, right, not 3.11, if you're on OpenShift, you can use our operator. And we're going to cut a new release of the operator in the coming weeks. And then you can talk to us to install it on-prem. Right?
Okay. Well, I think that is the last question that we had, Sebastien. So I'd like to thank everyone who attended today's webinar. We were recording it. If you want to go back and watch it, we'll put it on our YouTube channel later this week. So thank you, everyone, and I would encourage you to go to cloud.triggermesh.io and play around with what you just learned about.
Oh yeah, and Mark, if you go to cloud, this pop-up window, if you go to cloud.triggermesh.io and you start using the platform, notice at the top bottom right there is an intercom button. So if you have any trouble, just reach out to us on just reach out to us through the intercom here. I have a question, right? And we'll get back to you right away. So you have real-time support there in the platform.
All right. Thanks, Sebastien. All right, everyone. Thanks for your participation today, and we hope that wherever you are in the world, you're safe and happy. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.